I mean, basically, I don't really know. I didn't prepare anything here, but I got degrees in nanotechnology and then a master's in what amounts to physical chemistry. And um, I worked, I've sort of been moving into bio slowly. So first I worked in a bioengineering lab after my master's. So after my master's, I went to UC San Diego, worked in a bioengineering lab. And then um, that's where I guess I moved to Lockheed, where I stayed mostly in physical chemistry, nanotechnology, printed electronics with nanoparticle inks, that sort of area.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened at Lockheed was we slowly got into synthetic biology and
Right.
bioproduced materials. Um, and that whole thing, which sort of brought me back to sort of this slow move to biology and the bioengineering lab I was in at UCSD, and this knowledge sort of came together with especially bioproduced materials where you have physical chemistry and like rationally designed either proteins or more generally to call them polymers. And then you sort of get into not just how do you design them, but how do you make them? How do you get E. coli to make them with synthetic biology? How do
Mm-hmm.
you take what you learned there and then redesign the protein because somehow you learn that this protein cannot be made. Maybe it's toxic to E. coli, or maybe it's just too hard or too slow to be made. It doesn't express in the correct quantities. So this sort of synthesis of knowledge is what sort of, or synthesis of like fields, I guess, sort of came together with me moving to ETH Zurich to design diagnostic tests, which I would broadly just call chemical biology. It's the same idea of taking like intense chemical knowledge, but then using it on biologics, not just like small molecule chemistry or traditional inorganic or organic chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
but really
Yeah.
thinking about like proteins as molecules and DNA as just polymer and that type of deal. So that's
Okay.
where I am now.
Okay. So, what you have found the difference between the education system here in US versus in Zurich or Europe in general?
Um, I think the big one that people will notice is you need a master's in ETH in almost all of Europe. There are some direct admit programs, but they are rare. I think ETH has one for physics,
Mm-hmm.
but it's you need to be a stellar undergrad to go through a direct admit program. And I think people will find that coming from
You mean
universities that are not, sorry,
you mean direct from undergrad to a PhD program?
exactly, yes,
Okay.
yes. I think people will
US
find
like US is not that uncommon to have a PhD after undergrad, right?
correct. I mean, I think in the US it's almost exactly very common.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but in Europe it's not, except for these direct admit.
Right.
And but I think what like I was saying, what people will find is that at ETH, these programs are meant for exceptional students, and that doesn't mean every exceptional student because they're gonna probably give it mostly to their own undergrads who did exceptionally well, or maybe some students from like Caltech, MIT.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if like things like IIT even make the list personally, and part
Mm-hmm.
of that might just be a little bias and unfamiliarity with Indian schools, and part of it might be
Right.
curriculum overlap, and ETH wants some certain number of things, and IITs can't don't provide it in the curriculum. I don't know,
Right, right.
but so you need a master's. But above that, I think the European model is quite nice. Actually, I'm very happy with the fact I came here. I feel like I'm employed um as a researcher full time in the US. As you might know, it's very common to get like these assistantships where
Right.
you're paid for 20 hours of research and 20 hours you do like quote for free but for your PhD.
Right,
And
right.
if you're really lucky, these two projects overlap, and you get paid some low wage to do 40 hours of research, and then you teach, and maybe you get paid for that a little, but maybe you make 40K total
Mhm.
in the US. And 40K might even be at Stanford, where cost of living is just crushing, and 40K is not enough.
So
But
in Europe or where you are is different, ETH?
yes, so at ETH, I am employed.
Mm-hmm.
ETH publishes a pay scale for PhD students. There are 5 levels,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how in demand the field is. So like level one starts at someone making 48, 49, 50-ish K a year.
You
And then
mean
you get raises for 3 years up to like maybe 55K.
US dollars or Zurich, Swiss?
I'm talking in francs at this point, but
Okay.
as of right now, the conversion's like one franc is $1.1
Okay.
ish.
So same about. Okay.
But
So when you're
Yeah,
employed,
about
is
the
it
same year.
employed through like in US, right? Your research assistantship is basically you are, I shouldn't say slave to a professor, but you are working for a professor and you are doing what you are supposed to do in most of the cases. But in your case, or in Europe or Zurich, is it different or it's almost the same?
It's different. It's a much more employer relationship, at least on paper.
Okay. But you're
Um,
paid by your professor or your
I feel I professor. I mean,
okay,
the professor can have grant funds, but
okay,
it comes from the professor.
okay. So
And I
basically
think
it's
the
a,
easiest way to sum this up is in the US.
mhm,
I think a lot of grad students I know in the US sort of feel like they're getting the short end of the stick. They're told they're a student when it's inconvenient for them to be a staff, and then other times they're told, no, no, you're staff. We pay you when people
right, right.
don't want them to be students, and they get sort of the worst of both sides. Whereas I honestly feel I get the best of both sides. That when I get student discounts, when I get easy access to the gym, when I get all of that, it's as a student. But
Hmm.
when I get 5 weeks of paid holiday, it's because I'm staff.
Oh, okay,
And
okay.
I mean,
So
5 weeks is a
so
great
in that
number,
sense, you
especially
guys
for a
are
PhD, right?
right, right. Where in US you are on the mercy of the professor if it allows you to take a break. Okay, got
Right. And like,
it.
some
And
professors say like, no,
yeah,
Christmas is like 5 days. Go take 5 days. That's all you
yeah.
get.
But you guys have like paid holidays, and that's you can take that.
Yep.
There's nothing. Okay, got it. So how about
Yep.
let's talk about how about the curriculum wise. Like in US, when you go to a PhD program, right, or a master's program, you finish that much credits, and then so you finish, let's say, 30 credit hours of your core courses and your electives, and then you take some research credits where you finish your PhD in US. Is it the same in there too, where you have to finish some core courses or electives? And
Yes and no. So you have to finish courses, but nothing is prescribed. Although actually, I should note they've changed this. I came in under an older regulation, and ETH just like last year changed this. And I'm
Mhm.
not super familiar with the new regulation because it just doesn't matter to me. But um, you have to do 12 units of courses, and courses are described very broadly. It's anything career development.
Mhm.
For example, my German language courses count. Presenting a poster at a short conference counts as a unit. Doing a talk at a long conference is 3 units.
Oh, really?
They're
Okay.
very generous with what counts.
Oh, okay, okay.
And this is department. This change is based on department, by the way. So this is for the chemical and bioengineering department.
Mhm.
I have friends in the materials department where they just have to take 12 units of courses, and
And
they have to be courses, but it's just that's it.
and let's say in your course, were you able to transfer some master's credit, or you're not allowed?
No, no,
Okay.
you're not allowed. But honestly, 12 units over most courses are like 3-ish units, so this is not a big burden.
Okay. So
I
how
think any PhD student who is interested in
okay.
things will just find courses they want to use and research into.
And how many courses? How many credits is a course there? Like in US is three credit a course. Over there is the same.
I three's three's a good average number. Some are two, some are 4, 5, some
Okay.
go up to 6.
Oh, really?
Um,
Okay, got it. So,
yeah, like
so
if you take a really intense one, I know, like I audited like an optomechanical course. It
mhm,
was for master's. I didn't even take the test. I just wanted some info, but that was 6 credits, and it was a hard, intense course.
got it. And for an engineering student, or in general for a PhD student, uh, if I am not wrong, I have heard in like in UK, and I know for Japan for sure, yeah, like 3 years, 4 you're out. You have to be out.
Hmm.
Like in unlike US, right? It's totally again depends on the professor. Some people, like in my lab where I went my PhD, I finished in 3.5 4 years. There were students who were 6-ish. So it all depends on what professor feels like you're done, right? Is it the same there too,
Yeah. So there's no minimum here, but there is a legal maximum. It's 6 years.
or legal maximum? Okay.
So you have some protection against like these 8-year torture PhDs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's.
Um, but it also under 6, it depends on the chair. My chair likes around 4 years.
Hmm.
They'll usually extend you no problem to 4.5. If you get done in 3.5, that's on the shorter side. But like
Okay.
I've seen people done in like 3.8 years, like just coming up on 4. Um, but there are other chairs where 5 years is the normal. There's some where 4 is really the normal, like
Hmm.
extension to 4.5. Like at 4, they want you out, but you are protected against this 8, 9 year nonsense
Oh,
by
okay.
the 6 maximum.
And so the other part of it is for someone who is an undergrad right now or masters and they want to get admit to Zurich, ET Zurich, what would be the process would be? What you think would be what where they should
So
start
it
right now?
depends.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I think, as with all PhD applications, no matter where it is, they should start with figuring out what they want to do and what professors do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, and I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure other people who you've like had do this type of thing have said this, like it's going to be torture if you don't like what you do. It's
Yeah,
going to be
yeah,
5 years of
yeah, yeah,
hardworking torture.
yeah, yeah. But I'm talking
So
more
start
about what's the
there, but
process.
then why you need to find a professor willing to take you.
Okay,
So there are like this is a direct to the professor type
okay,
application.
okay.
There are some special schools at ETH
Mm-hmm.
that are cross department, but the schools have application processes. Like there's a school of life science that's shared between UZH, the University of Zurich, and ETH.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know how the application exactly works in those schools,
Mm-hmm.
but it is a more like American application where you apply and an admissions committee looks and whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
that's the reason I was asking this question is like my sense has been in US is for the schools like again MITs and Harvards, the standard process is even though you contact a professor, it has to go through the admission committee. Whereas in
yes,
some other schools, you can contact a professor like the way I got admission at University of Arizona was I contacted this professor and I sent him my CV and he said I liked your CV and I said I am want to work under you. He agreed, I agreed, I applied. This was mostly of informal formality at that
yes.
point. Where
So
MIT, in my opinion, was extremely different, where it was like, no, I can't do much. It has to go through the committee.
no, for sure. And it's actually very interesting because EPFL, like the sister institute of ETH in Lausanne,
Uh-huh.
is much more US style. So much so that
Okay.
I was talking to a professor there. She was like thought this was a good fit. She said, "Yes, apply. I'd be happy to have you in my lab." But I was denied from the admissions committee. And um when I asked her like what she could do, because just I mean my father's a professor, I tend to
Right, right.
have seen how these things work. My impression was she could basically tell him like it's my money, I would like him,
Yep.
please accept him.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like what your Arizona professor did, right?
Right,
Is
right, right.
basically say this is
Mhm.
the guy you're going to accept him, I'm paying.
Even though I
But
didn't have a very great GRE score, that's the what I was
exactly.
although I had a very good research background. So I leveraged that
Hmm.
and I said, okay, and said, no, MIT said, no, you had to go through admission committee. As you said, the admission was denied. The reason were obvious because I didn't had a good GRE score, but in other case, the professor said, I don't care about that. I'm going to untake you because I like what you do. This is exactly what I want. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yep, no, exactly. And EPFL didn't work out. The professor basically said she was a new professor ish,
Right.
new-ish.
Okay.
She didn't really feel that she had the political sway to
Got
go
it.
and go to
Okay.
bat and say this, so it didn't work out. But ETH's professor wanted me, and the process was different enough. But I still had to technically apply to the doctoral school, but
Right, right. You
it
have
was it was barely an application, quite frankly.
right, right. Yeah. So
Like,
yeah, so it looks like then in that case is like mix depends on right. It's not there is no set guidelines. As I said in MIT, I know there is a set guideline.
mhm.
No matter
Yeah,
what, you can contact whatever you want, but if it doesn't go through the admission committee, nothing will happen. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if someone wants to apply to ETH, I would strongly suggest they contact the professor first.
Professor. Okay, got it.
Or look on websites. ETH does have a listing of open doctoral jobs. I can
Mhm,
send you a link later today.
mhm.
I don't
Sure.
have it on
Yeah.
me, but I
Oh,
mean, it has all jobs up to
yeah.
professor solicitations. But professors put stuff there. They put it on their group website, which is again why it's going to be important to actually look at each professor and not look at the school as one school, but
Right.
at each professor and institute.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I
So,
mean,
so
I
Nathan,
yeah,
Nathan, one other question I have is that every student worry about is the scholarship, right? So, like in US, if you get admission to a PhD program, I would say close to 100%, you it comes with a funding, not masters, but
yeah.
PhDs, right? Is it the same in there, or they say, okay, we can give you admission? Because I had that thing when I was in India applying as an undergrad to a master's program and or a PhD program in UK. They said admission is fine, but you have to figure out your funding.
No, I won't claim to be an expert on this, but
Hmm.
I will say I am 99% certain, and I have not seen any evidence to the contrary, that every offer of admission comes with a work contract to
Okay.
be on that pay scale that I referenced,
Uh-huh.
which
Yeah.
where you are on the scale depends on department and professor and institute, but
Right. Right.
it will put you on the scale, and the minimum of the scale is a livable salary in Zurich. You know, you might not be eating, in fact, you won't be eating out every day. Zurich is crazy expensive, but you will be able to get your own apartment. You will be able to buy food. You will not have to worry about things like,
But can you buy
everyday
your car or
expenses.
no?
You don't want a car in Zurich. That's
Okay.
no. Not only will you not be able to afford it, but you will quickly find it's not worth it to own a
No,
car in
worth it.
Zurich
Okay, got it.
unless you are very rich.
Right, right. I guess yeah, Singapore is the same. I heard like you don't want to have a car unless you are insanely rich and you really want to
Yeah.
have a car. So it doesn't serve the purpose, and as you said, just expensive too. So okay, and what about let's talk about a little bit about the Zurich in general or Switzerland in general in terms of weather, in terms of for a student how conducive it is, and food wise, do you for someone
Yeah.
international student do they have a trouble or culture wise? I would say what's your feeling has been is coming from US
I
and
don't I don't yeah, I don't think you'd have trouble. I mean, ETH itself is crazy international.
oh, okay,
Um, you'll definitely there's especially in the undergrad population, there's definitely a huge bias towards, I mean, Swiss
European, yep, yep,
students.
yep. It's the
And
same in
I
US too.
mean, because the undergrad curriculum, of course, and because the undergrad's conducted in German,
Right, right.
I mean, just it's natural.
Yep.
Having said that, Zurich is about 50% foreigners. Switzerland as a whole is about 25% foreigners.
Hmm.
And I mean, most of those foreigners are in fact European, so it's not like you'll see a lot of Indians around, or you will see many, but not. When I say 50%, you will not see 50% of them being Asian. You'll see 50% being not Swiss.
Right,
But a
right.
lot of those will be German or French people, which is, but it all comes together to be that Zurich is not a city where I think you'll feel out of place. You might experience some just weirdness. I don't know how else to describe it. And you can Google this online. There are many debates about,
Yep.
racial issues and
Yeah,
feeling
I
like you
mean,
fit in Switzerland.
one of the thing I want to ask more particular. So I spent like 3 4 months in Germany, sorry, in Japan, and my
Hmm.
wife did her PhD from there. One thing I realized in Japan is because the culture is very, I would say, homogeneous, unlike US where
Hmm.
there's a variety everywhere you go, right? Food and students and race and everything. Mm, Um, the biggest shock I felt was the in lab or outside lab, the way people communicate is mostly was Japanese. Like hardly anybody spoke
Hmm.
English, and like you go to a canteen to buy a food, or you go to is it English is common or is not that it's uncommon. Like so, you go out a street and you see the signs, and damn, they are all in Swiss language.
It's You'll have to learn some You'll have to learn some Swiss, well, German, not Swiss German. That you don't need, but you'll have to learn some German.
Okay.
Um, but most people speak English. You can definitely get by with just English. I think the place I very often encounter needing some German
Mhm.
is when I am dealing with other immigrants who have
Okay.
jobs who might not have come from a place where they learned English.
Hmm.
So they know, I mean, at this point, still more languages than I do, but those languages do not include English.
Right, right.
So I know, as growing up in the US, I took Spanish in school. I have on more than one occasion found myself talking to a shopkeeper in Spanish, what little Spanish I could gather and remember from a decade and a half ago,
Hmm.
because at that time it was better than my German, and they were, migrants from either South America or Spain.
Hmm.
And so we sat there bumbling through my horrible Spanish, but that's what we did.
Hmm.
So you'll find, but that is not the common situation. You can very much get by with just English, but I
Hmm.
think to fit in, you'll want to learn at least some German to be able to like basic questions, right? You order something, the coffee, do you want it hot or on ice? Be able to order a coffee, things like that. You'll want to learn some.
Okay. And probably one of the last questions I have is jobs. Like unlike US, where basically, you graduate, you start applying for jobs, and then you get a job.
Mhm.
And is it the same system there? And how does it work for international students then in Europe? Like somebody,
Okay,
because
so
a
I
lot of the students who come to Germany or come to Zurich, they said, unlike I want to find a job there, unlike going back home or something. So how does that work?
yeah, I don't I don't have a great idea for you, but I can give you what I know just from my own planning and looking
Hmm.
forward.
Hmm.
And it's that Switzerland has very strict quotas on admitting people.
Hmm.
And one of like the federal institutes, ETH, EPFL, and even like the universities, UZH, they all can bring in doctoral students relatively easily because it's like fixed term, and I mean the state understands that they need people doing this research to
Right,
keep
right,
their research image, right?
right, right.
But staying is a different question, but there is one very nice rule, and that is that if you graduate from a Swiss university, within 6 months you can get any job and you can be counted at the same priority as Swiss and EU nationals. So that you have 6 months
To find a
to
job?
do this. Yeah, yes, to get the job, wherein your employer does not have to justify bringing you in as an immigrant.
Okay.
They justify you at the same priority as a Swiss national, which
Right.
is not at all really,
Like in US,
because you have this degree and you are within your 6 months.
right. Like what I'm saying, like US, you get 3 year of what they call OPT period, where you don't have to worry about getting a visa and then you can work for someone. And that's how US system, US students really take advantage of it. Is it the same
Yeah,
in there as you're saying, but it's just for 6 months?
but it's the nuances that it's not for getting a visa. Like in the US, it's that you don't need to get another visa. In Switzerland, you still need to.
Okay, okay.
But when, but what happens is when your resident card goes up for renewal, your employer doesn't need to justify hiring a foreigner. They don't need to treat it as if they've selected a foreigner over someone in Switzerland, which is obviously discouraged because Switzerland wants Swiss people to have jobs, right?
Right,
They
right.
can instead justify it at the same priority as a Swiss person
Okay.
because of this law.
Got
But
it.
you will still need to get like your renewed card, which is tied to your employer depending on which permit you have. So you still need to go through all of that. Your employer just doesn't have to. It's much easier than like pulling someone from the US or from India or from somewhere else.
Right, right.
Yeah, in which
So
case they have to
what,
justify.
but is it like in general, Switzerland in general do they have jobs, or people usually move out to Germany or UK or somewhere else to look for a job,
I
especially STEM jobs?
so there are definitely jobs. I don't have enough data to say whether it's enough jobs, too many jobs. I can't answer that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how easy necessarily it will be to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure many of this isn't even field dependent, but subfield dependent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you can do many types of biology and maybe only three are marketable.
Okay, okay.
But um, yeah, there are definitely jobs, and
Okay. So Nathan, this last question I have is since
like I don't have to go beyond that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So Nathan, just last question then. Do you think it's
Yes.
like for you, like do you ask that question, is it did I did the right thing not doing a PhD from a good institution from US versus coming over here and did a PhD, but then I really want to go back to US and do a work there. Do you think that would undermine your chances of getting a job, to start getting a good job for any student for that matter versus doing a PhD over here?
Honestly,
Again,
I think
from a
that
good
that was one
institution.
of my worries.
Uh-huh.
That was one of my worries, but I think there are a few schools in Europe that are like so internationally known that it's okay. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Oxford, obviously not in mainland Europe, but Oxford Imperial, um, are on that list. Cambridge, I think ETH is too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in biology, the Karolinska Institute is
Mm-hmm.
incredibly well known.
Okay.
So, like, I think you have to be very cautious of this because if, for example, I went to like the University of
ABC.
Geneva,
Yeah.
right?
Which has
I
good.
This might not be great. It's a good school, right? It's not a bad school, but coming back to the US, I think at least many people know ETH, but it's a quick fall off to the other schools they know.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying that because I know one guy who went to ETH. He did his master's undergrad in US, went to ETH, did PhD, but then he was hired by Argonne National Lab, and he's a professor
Hmm.
right now at Clemson University in South Carolina. So that was my reason. I know I was talking to him one time. I met him in a conference. He's a chair now. I mean, he's of course a little bit older, but he was saying that I had a great experience. That was really good thing to do.
Hmm.
And as I said, I always appreciate like different cultures also, right? So one of the things that you are there, you look at different cultures and learn many other things other than just studies. So that's also make new networks in Europe, and that's also important too. So cool.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Thank you very much for